experience. This week we're going to cover requirements and analysis, but specifically the data usage, getting contextual inquiry data into the upper left side of the UX wheel, where we'll be using data usage, specifically into a work affinity activity diagram. That'll be the process for this week, and most of this lecture will cover that. Before we embark on our work affinity activity diagram, it's important to know where we are on the wheel right now. In your text, if you're second edition, this is chapter 8, and we've done usage research data elicitation. We are now in the usage research data analysis section. We still have the usage research data models to go, user need and requirements. But again, this course, we're really about specific processes that lead to potential portfolio pieces. And that's because this is a 10-week course. If we were a year-long user experience program, we could extend this book over numerous semesters because there's that much in here. But it's important to understand that we are on the upper left side of the wheel. We are all about understanding user work and needs, and we have not yet created design concepts. That's going to begin around week 5. Then we go into prototype candidates, right side of the wheel, and then the verification and refinement of our designs where we use UX evaluation. So usage research data analysis has to do with our work activity and getting it down on paper. Well, there are several processes that can create systemic analysis of usage research. Our WAAD, as we call it, our user work activity data. The diagram itself is where we're going to organize this. And the beauty of a WAAD, the work affinity diagram, is that we'll bring models along in parallel. So what does that mean? Well, this week I'll be posting examples of that diagram, but if you pick different categories, for example, let's say the technology of the cell phone, and we do categories of how we use it. There's going to be hardware, there's going to be software, there's going to be several opportunities for us to line up categories. When you bring these models in parallel, you can list a number of activities that coincide with those specific categories. The idea is to immerse yourself in artifacts, sketches, posters, props, and diagrams. Just basically everything about that system that you're redesigning, but try to break it into categories that make sense. So we could have a category called interpersonal communication, which means the phone itself, the actual the app called phone, where you actually call someone. There's iMessaging, there's SMS, there's anything that communicates. There could be data storage as far as a category. But the idea is to bring different models of categories parallel in our work affinity diagram. So you need to look at a lot of examples to really get the hang of it. There are plenty of good examples in our text. So when we create a usage research analysis, we need certain components to help us develop what we're going to do. And our initial designing sketch usage is a good starting point, but we need a little bit more. We need to illuminate the work practice in a coherent way. So the idea would be to develop early modeling. For example, if we're redesigning a cell phone, we have to write down not only initial research elements, but start thinking and brainstorming about what this thing might look like. We write initial user stories. Now, user stories are very important because when we do our research, we can go out and talk to people and talk to users of phones, find out what they like or dislike about their phones. Similar to what we did with our designing sketch usage, our user stories can add more to that because we are only a starting data point. You may have heard this in the first couple weeks of this course, that since we are user experience professionals or people who care about user experience, we are the ones who can't trust our own opinions because we're always looking for good UX, not bad UX. And it's both good and bad UX from our data points, our users, that will be able to tell us these user stories. Number 3 there, distilling remaining raw data, synthesizing work activity notes, basically getting everything you know about your system together in one place. So the user sketch, the sketching usage that we've already done, that's going to help create our WAAD. Now, in this course, we do the cell phone because it's common. But when we break apart into our own projects, at that point, you'll be starting with a use case story. And that'll be the user story that generates your final project. So finally, once we get everything together, we need to organize that data. And that's how we can build work activity notes into this work activity affinity diagram, which is the deliverable for this week. So let's start with what I mean by continuing to develop early models. What we need to do is use all model-related data notes to continue any early user research data modeling that will start in data elicitation. So what does that mean? That's not just qualitative or quantitative surveys, qualitative interviews. It's not just going online and looking at forums and feedback sections. We have to define user work roles. Who uses our system? And then we have to create personas about who is going to be our target market for this. We have to create flow models of how the user is going to be utilizing our system. And this list extends far beyond just a phone. This is any product. We need artifacts, history, any kind of data that's been utilized for other systems that are similar. We need to understand the physical point on it. One of the things I noticed about the wireless, the work affinity diagrams from past semesters is I get a frequent listing about people who are upset because the buttons on the left side of their iPhone are too close together. So they click several times. If they're turning on volume or lowering volume, they usually hit both. So that's a repetitive physical artifact that has come up every time I do a WAAD. And that leads me to believe that those buttons probably should be separated. Now, as far as the tasks are concerned, the hierarchy and the task sequences, well, that's going to be next week's homework, which is a hierarchical task inventory. So once we get done with this, the work affinity diagram, we're really still filtering out what we want to have in our system. That's when we'll list the tasks and their sequences. So part 2 of my coverage of this concept of continuing to develop early models has a couple more really important points. If a given data note relating to data models fits into an existing model, we need to integrate it into that model. If not, we need to start a new model with that data. So there may be our physical perception of a phone, and then we get a data note of something that cannot be implemented into that physical model. When that happens, we need to start considering about starting up a new model that can handle that data. So this is what I mean by early models. We haven't committed much. When you think the word model, don't think we have this great investment of time and money into that model. It could be a concept that's previously sketched. All we're talking about is sort of rephrasing and reframing our concepts up to this point. We're not at a time where if we start up a new model, it would be a tremendous cost. You notice the book has the word agile in it, and there's a big concept about how agile prevents cost during late changes of a project. And it does do that through iterative feedback loops. But in this case, we are so early in our research, in our data extraction, that you can start up a new model. And sometimes you even scratch the old model, or you could incorporate two models. But it's just the given data notes that we need to get down on paper in this work activity diagram that will define what we're going to be doing later. Remember, we're not even in the point of settling on the physical, really. All we have is descriptions of the kind of functionality that we think we might want. We spent time on the, our sketching usage with thinking about things we don't like or things we like about the phone. That's where we're at right now. it's important to know that, well, we may be starting different models based on data points that don't apply to our original idea or model. And the word idea and modeling can be used interchangeably because we're so early in the wheel. It's important that if we don't have enough information for any of the data notes from our user research, that we set that aside, because we might be able to use it later, especially as it says here on the slide for the major data modeling activity in Chapter 9, which is next week, which is the hierarchical task inventory. And you're going to see that there's a few other things are covered in Chapter 9. It's a very important chapter of this text, including user personas. So we set that data aside for later and still maintain the data that applies to our idea now. Often, we'll come up with a data point from our research where we'll need to add it to the existing data model, and we'll need to do it in the middle of our process. So the example that the text uses says, hypothetically, if we have that ticket system, and one data point from one user says that that user feels it difficult to get enough information about events from a ticket seller at the ticket window, that is super important. We need to add that to our existing data model, even though we may be at a point later on in the process. So what's recommended professionally is that you list it as a barrier to workflow. And that means that the barrier to the workflow is going to be recognized because that's a big deal. So we need to not ignore any really important data points like this as we move through the process. And by using the barrier to workflow, that'll get people's attention. And what comes after that is anyone's guess. You could have training for the ticket seller. You could have a kiosk in front of the ticket seller. You could have, it depends on where you want your money to go, but there are a lot of solutions to that. But it needs to be added to the data model because it's such an important point. When we write our initial user stories, it's really important for us to not ignore small scope. We need to go really in depth on detail. Any minute detail we should write. So use all data notes related to your user stories to find those minute details. So we want to get to a point where you have enough information now about a user to create that story. In the previous slide, we heard of a user who said it was difficult to get information about events from a ticket seller at a ticket window. Well, that is a minute detail that has a great amount of importance. But other details, maybe the user couldn't understand the ticket taker because he was wearing a mask. Things like that, little subtle things. Anything about a single feature or capability a user wants or needs. The ability to have the ticket taker hear him properly, or him or her, if that user is going up to a ticket window and they have a mask on from the pandemic, right? So any single little thing. It could be the height of the ticket booth. It could be the height of the kiosk. It could be the brightness of the screen. Real subtle things. Could be the font that's on the screen that's not readable. What is the font size? So think small with your initial user stories, and that's where we can really target things that really shouldn't be ignored and be really thorough with our user research at this point, on the left side of the wheel. So just as a review of the concept of the user story, think of it as a brief narrative in the voice of a user work role that states a single need for some sort of capability. I need to do something. So you can think of as an air traffic controller, one of the work roles that I bring up in this course repetitively. As an air traffic controller, I would like to track all flights in the area, including hot air balloons, whatever, so that hot air balloons don't get clipped by a jetliner. So that's when we're talking about. We want to get narrow scope and think of that, what they want to do. And I will also say that in the work affinity diagram, the best posts that I've ever seen come from I want or I wish. I wish, when I see that as a work task in that diagram, I know that person's thought it out well. It's usually, I want this so that I can do that. And you'll see that in the examples of this week's homework. Here's an example of a user story. A user might say, I think you should be able to use either cash or a credit card to pay for tickets. And the story would go down, as a ticket buyer, I want to be able to pay with a credit card so that it will be more convenient. So the best WAADs have that sort of user story in it. I want the buttons on the left side of the phone to be separated so that I make no mistake when I turn up or turn down the volume, because I'm tired of it. And don't be afraid to emote in those things. I love user stories where there's some emotion. And you might see that in a lot of our assignments. Emotion just drives ideas. It drives data points. So the third component of our usage research analysis is distilling remaining raw usage research data. So what that means is any remaining research data that is not utilized in the WAAD, it should be about things other than user stories and data models. We've taken all the data from surveys, interviews, qualitative, quantitative, all the things we use for contextual inquiry, and all the things that can be turned into user stories are put in the WAAD. So everything else we can use into work notes. And it's very important you understand this. Doing this well is key to the rest of the usage research analysis, because right now the activity diagram is taking up most of our notes. So everything else we'll be able to use later in the other processes. And so, we've always talked about I want this or I need this in an activity diagram. Well, one of the other things that might come up in research data, that could be I enjoy this. I think this is good. I think this is bad. All of those things are not asking for things that can help you get things done, which is the user story. I want or need this because it will help me do this as my work role. But they're still important. Good things. I love hearing good things in raw usage of research data, because that means that we can focus on that and make it better. What about that is pleasing people? What about that do people like? And let's spread it out to our other elements of our system. So there's much value in happy reviews as well. But that needs to be set aside for other research analysis projects. So how do we proceed? Well, for each raw data note, the best thing to do is to synthesize each work activity in its turn. Try to arrange it into when it came in. Try to organize it by category, but when the data came in. So in the book, you see a lot of UX teams with Post-its. Okay? In this class, we're going to end up using Trello. Trello is a great software for this thing. Totally free. It's a way you can order elements. It has the ability to share via cloud. So the Post-it note is great because it allows a group to look at the same thing at one time. But a lot of the processes, even in this very current book, this latest edition is super current, even those have sort of on-site, on-ground team building exercises where Post-its are used. And those are fine because you can switch them real quick, but with Trello you can do the same thing. So all these work activity notes will be inputs into the WAAD. And we just need to see good examples of them moving forward. So when we create an activity note, we want to make sure it's elemental, and that means understandable. Make sure everyone understands what that user wants. We want clarity. Anything confusing from the research gathering needs to be followed up on. If a user had, in a qualitative interview said something confusing but important, let's say they were emotive about it, and that research gatherer did not elicit a confirmation or clarity or something like that to clarify, that's huge. That means we've lost possibly a major important data point. We also have to make sure that the activity notes are brief. And concise is very similar. We want it sentence. I need this because of this. So elemental, easy to understand, needs to retain the context. We need to retain what the intention of that note is. So if you have the note, it's okay to add an annotation to that note. And that's what Trello, that software, does for us. It allows us to do comments on each note on the side. So The text has some really good bylines on what guidelines rather on what it takes for a good work activity note. And again, I will be showing you some good examples. So I'm going to clarify what I meant by activity note being elemental. And that means easily understandable. But specifically, it has to be about exactly one point or idea. It can't be about multiple points. That's where being elemental is a little bit different than being brief or concise. Because you could have brevity but still have several points in one short post. I hate storage on my phone. Well, what kind of storage? Local, external, cloud, core data? What it's going to be? So that's kind of where that comes in. You want one declarative point, concept, an idea, or a fact, and maybe one rational statement after. I need this because as a work role person, this is my work role, it would make my life easier. That's the rationale statement. So simple and usable. So an example of an initial work activity notes, and this is for the MUT system from our text. Let's say we interview one ticket buyer, and that ticket buyer says, it's too difficult to get any information about events from a ticket seller at a ticket window. For example, sometimes I want to see information about popular events that are showing downtown this week. Well, we take that. That's too much right there to make a good activity note. We need to synthesize that, okay? And I'll do that in the next slide. So this is our synthesized work activity note. Too difficult to get event information at the window. Please provide about current popular downtown events. No extraneous words here. Brief, simple, no confusion. Too difficult to get enough event information. Provide information. How they provide that information, well, that's forthcoming. But now we have that activity in our notes, and we can put that in our WAAD. That's the beauty of this process. It really is one of my favorite processes in this whole course, because you can really tell when you read them who's got the right data. And we'll talk about how we're going to get that data. But a lot of it, unfortunately, because we're one person and you're one student, you have to kind of get the data from yourself. We don't really have the time to go out and canvass everybody about your cell phone. So it's going to be from you, but we're going to make sure you synthesize it and make sure it looks good. So the synthesizing and the making elemental are all huge parts. So never quote the raw data verbatim. Use at most 3 succinct sentences. Here's another example for you of a decent activity note. If the raw user says, I always get the feeling there are other good events that I can choose from, but I just don't know which ones are available, and the ticket seller is usually not willing to help much or doesn't understand what I need, especially when the ticket window is busy. I'd rather be able to do my own searching. Bingo, a lot to digest there. So how do we synthesize it? Ticket seller not showing every option, first problem. 2, seller too busy, doesn't understand needs. 3, user wants to find out events. I'm thinking kiosk if it's in the budget. But that is what we're talking about. We saw 3 problems in that comment, and we've nailed it to 3 sentences. So I don't want to ignore the word concise from my list of things on the work activity. I want you to make a specific point. Filter out any noise, fluff, or verbiage. So let's take another look at another example of that. A raw user might make the comment, it's hard to judge just from information available at the ticket window whether an event has been well received by others. So we synthesize that. That user wants events and reviews and feedback. And then we have this in bracketed. Design idea. Include capability for people to add reviews? Question. Locate at event venues rather than a kiosk? So those are the things we need to focus about. Not only, these are just notes on the activity, but user wants reviews and feedback. Does that mean we have to do it? No. This is part of what the diagram is about, though. Do we include that? That's the design question. Do we locate at event venues rather than the kiosk? So, having the location of the ticket booth being away from or at the venue instead of at the kiosk means you have a lot more in and out with theater goers or whatever people are selling tickets for. So we've synthesized a worked activity note, added a quick design idea, but everything was succinct and made sense. So these are things we have to remember. Because when you hear someone wants reviews and feedback on events, that's kind of a different issue than the original comment, which was about problems with the ticket seller. This may not be a ticket booth issue. So let's say you've done your WAAD this week, and you want to look back and do a quick review of it. Well, because you did the WAAD, it's sort of tough for you to really confirm that each activity note is easily read or understood at a glance. So it's best to have someone else look at it who's unfamiliar with the system, because they're the ones who can more easily interpret the readability and the comprehensibility. But we really should understand it at a glance, meaning anyone who's a theater goer should understand what our note is. So with each activity note, be sure to retain the topical context. Make each note complete and self-standing, meaning a separate point. Remove or disambiguate any pronouns, any references to context. It's not about he, she, it, whatever. And it says at the bottom, if after splitting note you have one that mentions it, he, she, resolve that ambiguity by being more specific. Call it ticket buyer. Call it ticket seller. Those impersonal pronouns carry no data with them. They don't help us. And again, don't lose context when you split up one note. Just keep succinct. I like the subject, verb, object. That works great, and often it starts with, I wish, I want. That's what you're going to be doing, because you are the user in our exercise. So we've been through conciseness, we've been through brevity, we've been through context. Other guidance on our WAADs. Refer to work roles rather than individual people. Like ticket buyer wants, ticket seller wants. User doesn't carry enough information. That's, user, sometimes we have to use the word user, but we want to be as explicit as possible about our work roles. That's a huge thing. As we get further and we go through our discussions, you're going to see some crazy workflows. I love hitting the air traffic controller. That is imperative. Know the work role, and take a quick glance and see if you repeated any of the same information in multiple places, because that happens, especially in our assignment where we ask for 24 notes in 4 categories, 6 in each. So be ready for that. So don't include information from any other process. Just go with your user data and what you feel about your phone for this assignment. All right, lastly, organize work activity notes. For any small projects, sort out the notes into category piles on a tabletop. Obviously, you can't do that, but this Trello software, if you use it, you're going to be able to just drag things into the category as if it were an index card on your computer screen. Otherwise, the notes will automatically get into the WAAD. That's huge. So you want to keep your activity notes separate before they get in and organize it that way. So when you get to your assignment this week, you might have a Trello that has 4 categories, and maybe one category has 10 notes, 4 more than the required 6. You can leave it that way, okay? It is the way it is. But you want to make sure that notes that don't belong in the WAAD don't make it in the WAAD. Hope that makes sense. If not, please contact me. So now we've got our activity notes. We can talk about the ones that will make it into the hierarchical affinity diagram. So affinity means being related as by being in common categories. And that's why the requirement for this week's assignment is to create 4 categories. So the WAD's intention is sorting out activity notes. And categories are common topics or themes within the work domain. So as I said before in a previous slide, since you're doing your phone, a lot of people will just, do hardware, software, maybe environment, maybe data storage, maybe gaming. There's many categories that you can use. So when you construct this, generally, this is a printed exercise. Of course, we're online again, so we have to do it digitally. But you might need to print the work activity notes. And usually you need plenty of wall space in the design studio. I know my last job, we had a wall for every type of thing that we'd go over. It was a gigantic wall. It was 30 feet long and just huge. So it would contain flow models, wireframes, but we do everything digitally, and then we print it digitally. We didn't want to take time to actually handwrite anything. It's just so much easier just to do it digitally and print it. So what the book shows you is people taping up large belts of butcher paper or similar on walls of room, very similar to what we did in elementary school, or at least I did, where you'd have like a design cloud or something like that. But those are the working spaces for posting work activity notes so that people can see them. Now, my opinion is that this process probably should be digital, especially with COVID. And I don't think our textbook authors, who are fantastic, take into account how great the digital products we have right now are, especially in the pandemic. So when you're preparing to construct this, you sort the work activity notes by user role, as I said in the previous slide, and you make a separate diagram for each user role. You don't need to include a miscellaneous category, but if you want to, it's allowed. If you want to do 3 categories for your WAD and have a miscellaneous one, you're more than welcome. It's very common to do. So here you see user work role 1, user work role 2, user work role 3. Your work roles will be the phone work role, and how the user interacts with that phone. So once you get these things organized digitally, they tell you to consider each work role pile and corresponding sub WAD in turn. So there may be in each work role pile or category sections or activities that maybe don't belong to any category that you have listed in your WAD. And for each one of those, consider each work activity note in turn. So that's where it might go in the miscellaneous, or it might even create a new user work role. So in a second, I'll show you different versions of the WAD and good ones from the past, and you'll see the effectiveness of what this does. And as I said in the previous slide, if a work activity note doesn't fit into any group topic already posted, well then you could hit the miscellaneous, or it might benefit you to start a new group and add a label to identify the topic in the new group. And that's totally acceptable. So generally, because a phone has so many diverse work roles, like I said, it could be the phone, the communication aspect, technological storage, the camera section. I mean, there are so many functionalities in a phone, and each functionality could be seen as its own work role, that this could get wide quick. I say you can have a good portfolio piece if you do it in Trello and do 4 categories. But as I said previously, it's okay if you do one that's miscellaneous. As we're talking about the construction of our WAD, I'd like to reiterate the importance of precise labels, because the way this is used later on in the process, there's a need to identify the topic immediately, just at a glance. We don't really want to reread notes to know what the cluster is about. We don't want to have to reassign to a group later on. That's why we have these groups and this organization. So the label should have a high descriptive power to capture meaning. And you'll see that book authors refer to meaning as gestalt. Avoid vague general terms, which we've already been about, but like an example, how we validate information, that's vague. That could be form validation, it could be the thumbprint validation. So we could say should have been how we validate inputs to data forms, and if you can get even more specific than that, that'd be great. So anything ambiguous, which I'll catch once it gets submitted. So what if you have an activity note that already fits into a group topic that's been posted, but adds a little breadth to it? Well, here we see the post-it with the purple note, and deep down inside there it says identity theft and credit card fraud is a huge concern to me. Well, we have this addendum to that with security concerns plus privacy plus trust. so that we've added more breadth to that document. Now, before that gets in the WAAD, we're going to need to make that more brief and concise, or maybe break it into a different note, because privacy and trust are related, yet not quite. So the security concerns are what is duplicated in that section. So privacy and trust could break off into another group topic label if necessary, which is, it makes sense. Now, I'm worried about privacy on my phone. I'm worried about trust with my phone. I'm worried about my banking app. Those things are addendums to that, but that's because we want to remove two separate points and show that they're connected, and to be reevaluate later so we can make a new note if necessary. So the previous slide where we added an addendum to a previous note can be even more cumulative if we find groups that are related. So what you do is you take those groups and you basically group them together with a higher level label. So here we see down below, I should be able to buy weekly, monthly, other seasonal passes as a general ticket, using which I can travel from anywhere to anywhere, like a day pass. Or I envision buying movie theaters eventually. But if you look, the types of tickets that I want to buy, the types of events I expect to find, and then other services I expect from this kiosk. So you see below the right note there, I would expect to access any public transportation tickets from any kiosk in a specific area. So up above, we have a very traditional group label, like the types of things I expect to use the kiosk for. And so we've combined three very similar groups into another higher level group. So we can also split groups in addition to joining groups. And if a group, and this is according to the text, gets to have more than about 10 work activity notes, and the topic's getting too broad. That may or may not be so. You can tell if it's getting too broad. You might start seeing ambiguous notes, things like that. In our homework assignment, which pretty much this presentation is prepping you for, I asked for 4 categories of 6 activity notes. I don't like to do more than that. I think more than that can be a little bit overkill, especially with one system, which is our phone. But the one system is technically several systems because the phone is so complicated and we have so many areas of usage with the phone, like the cameras, like the messaging, like the phone. So if you need to split into subgroups. Do the reverse of what we did in the previous slide, but add a narrower label. You can always add a super topic label to a common parent node to encompass all of this. Remember the previous label 2 slides ago said security, privacy, and trust. That might now be split back into 3 parts: security, privacy, and trust. So by adding these addendums in the previous couple of slides there, it's just for reevaluation. So the more you split, the more precise the notes are, and the less confusion there is able to be. So much like the concept of agile development that our new textbook envisions, which means iterative feedback loops, iterative refinement, you can always continue to refine, grow, and evolve your WAADs. Don't go crazy on this assignment. Do the best you can with the examples and see what ideas come from it. See what happens. I would say always keep it moving. Don't drag it out because time is money, especially in this business. And don't get sidetracked with details or sidebar discussions. Think about the things you want. Narrow it down. Start with notes. Narrow it down. This should be, I would say, a 3-hour exercise, not more. The first hour maybe just writing down things that you like or hate about your phone. It comes right off the sketching usage assignment. But you can continue this every day for the rest of your life. However, we have to move this out. This is one process, and every process, once you cease getting a return on investment, it's time to move on. So don't think too much. If you followed the examples and if you work with the brevity, conciseness, and the elementary requirements of these notes, you're going to be fine. I'll give a good feedback. I'll give a good look over before it gets in your portfolio so that it looks professional, because this is also another portfolio piece. So this is an image straight from our text, and I wanted to post it because it's amazing how many clusters there are on this board, And it's just, this is a nightmare to me. You've got the wrapping paper in the background taped up with clusters, and you see 3 very young employees there studying clusters to form groups. This is as large a cluster board as I've ever seen in my entire life. It's probably at least double the size of the largest cluster board I've ever seen. And I just wanted to make a point about that. We've got labels at the top. You can see that things are taped there. Are hierarchical. You can see that. But my next fear is, how do you proceed from this, and how much time are we taking for this? And my other question is, I haven't worked on a project like Netflix or something huge like that. I worked on the Allstate lead marketplace for Underground Elephant, which is a pretty famous piece of software, but I wasn't involved in the UX. I just developed on it, and that I would love to have seen the cluster. I got in there much later, where they just asked me to develop. But I also worked for MLB.com, Major League Baseball.com, I worked on their game day, but 20 years ago. These are well-known applications, but I can't, if I reverse engineer them, I can't see them having clusters this big. So that's something to think about. And I've been around a really long time, so I just want to really elaborate on this photo, because to me, if I'm you folks, this looks scary. And I'm wondering, from myself, who's experienced, who, tend to think myself at my age to be more of an owner or manager than a UX worker, this is frightening. I worry about how much money is being wasted and how much the return on investment is in this one cluster board. And here we see a more organized cluster board. Not the same as the one before. It's got hierarchy. It's grouped at this point, okay? But now where do we go? I just got through, telling you that I don't think you need more than 6 ideas to get too broad. The text says that once you have 10 ideas, that's when it gets a little bit ambiguous. And here they're definitely going to have to reduce and refine more. And that's what they're talking about, is basically refine, grow, evolve your WAADs. But we only have 1 week to do this, so don't go crazy with it. Spend a little bit of time on it. Do it the way you like it. If you understand the intention of the assignment, idea generation still based off data research, you're going to be in great shape. Ask yourself before you hand it in, what do you think the ideas that got generated are, and what are realistic? Now from the text, the WAAD for the MUTS ticket system. And here you see a couple of groups still with 8 or 9 activity notes, but it is grouped, and it's grouped to some super labels, some super apparent concepts here, but we've got a lot of ideas at least, which is good. At this point, I still see reduction, but the way the text delivers this message is it's time to import this on a software screen, on a large touch screen. And that's where I think Trello is going to really help you guys. Also in the assignment, I advocate Google Docs. It's fine. I'll know what you're doing, but Trello comes off as a more portfolio-worthy submission. So this image was also taken from the book, and it's a group building a WAAD with a software tool on a large touchscreen, so they can drag and drop elements. And this is, in my personal opinion, something that could have been done sooner. They're thorough. I like their processes, but I believe a lot of the stuff we could have jumped right to the software tool and eliminated things right away. But they did, to their credit, have a very long glance at the post-it board and the cluster board before they reduced. So we're going to skip all this, and we're going to develop with at least some kind of software of your choosing. After the WAAD is complete, and it's never complete really, but the first go around of when it's complete, after you've consolidated and communicated what everything is, it's time for you to share your understanding of those user work activities and any issues with them with all your stakeholders. And then you obviously explain how you went about it, and that's where you include the initial post-it scheme, then the grouping, then the splitting or adding of parents, then the reduction and refinement, then the evolution, and then the transfer over to a software element. Once you get done with that and you show it to your client, customers, or users, you just want to get feedback. it is possible that, especially with Agile, it's possible that any of the stakeholders could fill in some gaps, or at the very least, it could resolve misunderstandings. Granted, even if you have precise labels as recommended in this presentation, users may have still some confusion, and that happens. They might want to know where you got your data, what kind of person, delivered that data, or persons. And that's a time for you to provide any missing insights. So there's got to be one round of feedback and one round of discussion. So after that discussion, the next thing is to possibly go out and get more input based on what you achieved, and then get some refinement. So the idea is to get everyone on the same page. That's where in this text, this version of our UX book, there's more of an agile understanding of that this is going to go through iteratively through the left side of the wheel. And yes, again, it does scare me when it comes to budgeting. The client has to sign off on this process, and the client has to pay for this process. Otherwise, you're not going to do it. So, this is very common in new functionality, new systems. WADs for refined systems or systems that already exist are also common. They're a little bit easier. That's why your homework assignment is what it is, and we'll go over that in just a couple of slides. So just to circle back, the WAAD, again, is the left side of the wheel, upper left. And it's part of the section on rapid usage research analysis. And again, I want to reiterate, we have extremely limited time, so only get the most important work activity notes. I would say that if you do more than 6 per category in your homework, you're doing too much. And include only the most important points that you want to make in your WAD. This is a time where we can remove clutter. Don't use deep structure in the WAAD, excuse me. I said that enough. I think I can get it right. And I'm hesitant to call it a WAD, but I know that in the job place a lot of people call it a WAD. But try to avoid any deep structure. Just have a category and the 6 things about that category that you want. I want this because of my work role, and it would generate this. So subject verb object is great. And like I say on this bullet point, it can just be listed under each category. So next I'm going to show you the assignment, and then I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So this is your assignment for this week. It's meant to illustrate the gap between requirements analysis and design. So you've been asked to redesign your cell phone. It could be whatever cell phone you have. And you are to make a work activity affinity diagram of that device. So if you don't have a cell phone, just let me know. I can give you another option. It could be something similar that you know of, like it could be your desktop or your laptop computer. Google Docs has drawings, which is pretty nice. Obviously, we're doing Cultura to broadcast this, so these links will not be clickable. But there's the link to Trello, and that's a free software. And I'm fine with any other mechanism. If you want to use Photoshop, use Photoshop. So to help you organize, here's some options for your categories. It could be work, play, maybe communicate. Remember, miscellaneous is open. If you want to take another angle to generate ideas, you could use even more general categories than work, play, communicate. You could do maintenance, product quality, equipment maintenance, manufacturing cost, production volume. It could be on the business side. It could be environmental ramifications. We go through so many phones, and they're definitely a sad waste product. What about recycling? I'm fine with those categories as well. Most students enjoy the work, play, communicate categories. Those tend to generate the most easy ideas at first. But again, at the end here, it says, please have 4 categories with at least 6 ideas for each category to help with the potential redesign. Also in your submission, please tell me what model phone you have. If you do it in Trello, you can just send me the link. You can submit the link when you submit your homework. Now for a couple examples that I really like. Here's one, and it has the 4 categories. It has communication, product quality, maintenance, and tools. I like this because it followed the pattern of subject, verb, object. Take tools, the first box at the top. Siri custom shortcuts are difficult to set up and often don't work. That's a statement that's very clear and very understandable. It's very true, too. Find your parked car tool only works at times when you've been getting directions. Create a tool if you need to remember where you're parked before you leave your car. That I could probably make a little more concise and just do the first sentence. I still like the idea. Maintenance. Check daily for overheating. That's a good one. Look at how succinct these are. Often in my career, I used to really like when students put I wish or I want as a precursor on this. And I like that. That tells me you're thinking. So I don't mind that as much because you are the user in this data usage. This time you are the data point. But if you look at this, storage is very limited and monthly charges if needed more. That's not good. Easy to transition between the apps, open, but no option to close all. That would be great. Option to close all. What a great idea for your phone. This I really like. I think that there are a lot of great ideas here. I know, like wireless charging at times not responsive or only at a very specific angle. I don't really know what that means, so that would be one of the things I'd ask for feedback on at the end. But the rest of them are pretty good. Phone design has been repeated for the last 3 models. It's true. It's true. This was, I think, iPhone 10. So update apps are now automatic, which is less time consuming. So that's a positive. That's fine. That's a note as well. So if you look at these, most of them have really good idea. Look at the SOS button. It's 5 down on the right. SOS button is a great tool for emergencies, but process to getting the button takes 3 steps. Oh my gosh. That's terrible. So these are really good ideas for this type of thing. One more. Look at the product quality, because I look at the short sentences and I look at the long sentences. Look at product quality of the third one down. Battery needs to be charged every 12 hours or more, depending on use. It needs to be charged every day. Not great for camping or limited charging capability. Yeah, I mean, I get that in every submission. The battery is never enough. So this I think is a good one. I think the person made good categories, good concepts, and for the most part, the labeling was very good. And if you look at the end, there were a few good design ideas. So now we can go even more in depth. This person did ease of use, interoperability, fun, and physical. So I like the succinctness of this, and the fact is, even though the verbiage is succinct, I can tell what this person wants. Interoperability with our Android apps. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be incredible. I mean, we have Boot Camp for Mac, right? So better Hey Siri that doesn't false trigger. That is great. Second to the left, second down on the left. So many times I'll be doing a screencast for you folks, and Siri will chime in, and you can hear her on my screencast. Very good. And better hands-free texting while driving, face scan that works with pandemic masks. How good is that? So this is one that, even though it's succinct and small and brief, look at how many good ideas there are. Better performance in high solar loads. Oh, it's beautiful. So take a good look at these. Somewhere in between. I'll be honest with you, both of these earned a 25 out of 25 based on my rubric. There's always can be some improvement, but generally, if you do your best, and I'm allowed to give you a little feedback, I might give you some negative feedback, but still give you a 25. Usually, if I like a few of the ideas and you hit the requirement, then I tend to give the 25. So this good ideas all around for this. All right. So that is the homework, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out.